So here we are. Right now, too, we had three. One of them died. Now I just have the male and female who will hopefully come together and have a litter later. They were supposed to be. She was supposed to be pregnant now, but she's late, really late, which is horrible because I was like, this is perfect. We'll have puppies. It'll be summer. The puppies will go home at the end of the summer. I'll be back to start the church here. It's going to be perfect. Now, instead, she's almost a month late. So it'll be the beginning of the church year, and I'll have large, active puppies not quite ready to go home. It's going to be awful. It's going to be really hard. So, but it is what it is. No, and everybody kept telling me, make the best plans you can, cover all your bases, be as thorough as you're able, and then expect that things will go wrong. I was like, okay. But she's been so regular that I thought whatever, like I was worried about like a medical emergency or she'll get super sick or we'll lose puppies or she won't get pregnant. I was not worried that she was too late because she's never late. And she was late, super late. And I'm just like, this is not, but everybody told me, right, your plans will go wrong, so I shouldn't be surprised. Well, this is a smaller turnout than usual, but it's not tiny. And people are still coming in. So, thank you very much for being here. All right, I'm starting. Good morning, everybody. Happy Father's Day. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Providence. I'm Reverend Liz Lerner-McClay, and on behalf of this congregation, welcome to this beautiful morning, this unusual service, the beginning of summer. May we make the very most of this day we have been given, starting right now, together. Did anybody else have trouble not just busting out into song hearing that song? Didn't you just want to be like, whoa, 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 feelings? Oh my God, that was really tough for me, Vicki. I didn't think it would be such a challenge as it turned out to be. Oh my gosh, it's been too long since I heard that song. And it's so perfect for this morning. This is totally a generational thing, right? There's a few people who are like, what is she talking about? I have no idea. This song that was just on the radio all the time in the 1970s. Our opening reading, our invocation this morning is Coniferous Fathers. Let's fashion gentle fathers, expressive, holding us how we wanted to be held before we could ask, singing off-key lullabies written for us, songs every evening like possibilities, fathers who say, this is how you hold a baby, but never mention football. Say nothing in that moment, just bring us to their chests naturally without shyness. Let's grow fathers from pine, not oak. Coniferous fathers raising us in their shade, fathers soften us to bend, fathers who love us like their fathers couldn't, fathers who can talk about menstruation while playing a game of pepper in the front yard. No, take baseball out. Let's discover a new sort, fathers as varied and vast as the superior forest. Let's kill off sternness and play down wisdom. Give us fathers of laughter and fathers who cry, fathers who say, check this out, or I'm scared, or I'm sorry, or I don't know. Give us fathers strong enough to admit they want to be near us. They've always wanted to be near us. Give us fathers desperate for something different. Not Johnny Appleseed, not even Atticus Finch. No more Rolling Stones, no more lazy boy dads reading newspapers in some other room. Let's create folklore side by side in a garden singing psalms about abiding. Just that. Abiding, being steadfast, present, evergreen, and ethereal. Let's make the old needles soft enough for us to rest on, dream on, next to them.
Please join me in the words of our chalice lighting found in your order of service. This light burns also in our hearts, and it lights our path towards harmony, justice, and hope for all.
And this is our time of greeting. It's our chance to move around, say hi to each other, people we've never seen before, longtime friends, family. Let's make sure no one goes ungreeted. Hey, son, you didn't let it fluster you. That was great. And as we come back from our time of greeting, can we just take a moment to greet everybody who's watching from home? Hi, everybody at home. Thank you for being with us in this way, and happy Father's Day to everybody at home also. And as we find our seats, we've got our reading of the church covenant together. It's printed in your order of service. You can be seated. We, the members of the First Unitarian Church of Providence, with respect for the worth and dignity of each person, with wonder at the light we know by many names, and with gratitude for our deep connection to each other and to the larger web of existence, covenant to walk together in our search for truth, seeking the paths of wisdom, compassion, and justice. Our opening hymn is number 8 in the gray hymnal, Mother Spirit, Father Spirit. This is actually, interestingly, another hymn that was written by Norbert Chopik, who everybody remembers is the person who invented flower communion, which we just celebrated last Sunday. So this is another Norbert Chopik hymn. We're going to hear it once through because we don't have the choir to support us now that it's summertime. So we're going to hear it once through and then join together in singing, Can We Rise in Body or Spirit?
Hello, I'm Kai Robert Speaker. I'm your worship associate today. Our reading today, Why I Come to Church by Dale Trumbore, is based on a sermon by the noted Reverend A. Powell Davies. Let me tell you why I come to church. I come to church, and would whether I was a preacher or not, because I fall below my own standards and need to be constantly brought back to them. I'm afraid of becoming selfish and indulgent, and my church of the free spirit, brings me back to what I want to be. I could easily despair. Doubt and dismay could overwhelm me. My church renews my courage and my hope. It is not enough that I should think about the world and its problems at the level of a newspaper report or a magazine discussion. It could too soon become too low a level. I must have my conscience sharpened sharpened until it goads me to the most thorough and responsible thinking of which I'm capable. I must feel again the love I owe to others. I must not only hear about it, I must feel it. In church, I do. I am brought towards my best, in every way towards my best.
The joys and sorrows of our church this week. We have a candle of thankfulness that we are not part of the Southern Baptist Council. That was not mine. I mean, I don't disagree, but that wasn't mine. The official start of summer, an official invitation to use our bathrooms and air conditioning at the Hope Street Farmers Market. Look for the Rainbow Windsock at 38 Alfred Stone Street, 5 houses down, from Janet and Jim. And a candle of joy for my daughters who are off on a week-long adventure with their dad. And this is our time for meditation and contemplation and prayer. Our meditation this morning will be followed by our time of silence. And of course, as always, if you have lost someone close to you in the past year, we invite you to stand or raise your hand during that time of silence. And then we close with a small musical response. The meditation we have this morning is one that I wrote. And I'd like to invite you to kind of enter into it. It's sort of a half-guided meditation. And I wrote it the last time I think I saw Tim lift Alex out of his car to transfer him to his mother's car. Alex was maybe 11 and really heavy. And Tim was kind of struggling, and I thought, I don't know that he's going to be able to lift him after this. And Alex was asleep. He and Rachel were both asleep. And I thought, I think I'm seeing the last time Tim's going to lift and carry his son. And it was very poignant. And I went home and I wrote this reading, which is called Carried Up to Bed. So I'd like to invite you, if you're comfortable, to take a breath, settle your body comfortably, and if you're willing, close your eyes and go where this meditation may take you. Wouldn't we all wish to be carried up to bed one more time? So dependent, so confident, and so cared for in that particular way for all the right reasons. We are not ill, nor hurt, nor helpless. We are simply small and tender and tired. How long have parents carried their children to bed? Have children enjoyed that passive bliss? There we lie, half asleep already, in a car or on a sofa after a late night. We could be roused, but our eyes are closed. We are less asleep than we look, more asleep than we feel. Our parent comes to fetch us up to bed and slides a strong, quiet arm under our shoulders and neck, another under our knees, and hoists us up to be carried to our room and our waiting sheets. We sleepily turn toward them, maybe hike an arm loosely over their shoulder and around their neck, and hang on a bit. We feel them walking down the hall or stepping up the stairs, and then nudging open the door to our room, walking across the floor of the dark, familiar space. We know where we are without opening our eyes. We feel them pause by the bed to get a firmer grip, and then lean over and lay us down, pulling the sheets down to fold our legs in pulling the sheets up to tuck us in. Would that I had known that last time for what it was. Now it is my task to do the tender carry, the kiss and caress across the face before leaving the room. That is precious too. But children know the date-stamped preciousness of being carried up to bed for what it is and nestle into its warmth. Years will pass, and we will still feel small and tender and tired. And this gift will likewise have passed, gone to others, to our own and others' children. And we will each of us have then only the memory and the charge to carry on tradition, the sweet weight, the carrying of another. As long as I live, I will remember the nights when my sister and I were little and our parents would bathe us and put us to bed. I will remember the heavy-handedness of my dad toweling my hair dry. You were always like, and how we would be bundled into our nighties and then ready for bed, read to bed, usually from a small stable of beloved favorites like Horton Hatch's The Egg, which was also one of my father's favorite stories. Having been raised by a feminist mother and a feminist father, a man who devoted himself to his wife and daughters, and does still, who was the one who picked us up at school when we were sick, who often read us to sleep, who not only taught me to drive a stick, but also to load the dishwasher, and clean the kitchen at the end of the day, and how to sort and wash laundry. Because those were his household tasks, along with the more predictable chores of lawn mowing and shrub trimming and assembling furniture, though that was not ever his strong suit, the last one. His assembled furniture has always had something a little off: a crooked cabinet door, a creaky hinge that never closes right. Anyway, having been raised by a man like that, who both served in the army and went every month to the store to stock up on every kind of feminine product when the rest of his family were all simultaneously miserable with our periods. Having been raised by a man like that, by a man who has given his life to his wife and daughters, I have to think there is more to say in the unfolding national dialogue regarding masculinity. Because it is not enough to leave it at toxic masculinity, mansplaining and manspreading and Me Too. That feels too much like leaning into misandry, a term First U member David Riley mentioned to me. When I was speaking with him recently about this sermon topic, David wrote me to follow up, and he said, "It strikes me as telling that there's a common word for denigrating women, misogyny, but the counterpart word for denigrating men, misandry, is rarely used and little known. Yet I believe," this is still David, "that both attitudes are present among us and can be very powerful. I have experienced both. I don't think the world is well served by not acknowledging both. Though given the age-old power imbalance between men and women, I recognize," he said, "that they shouldn't be equated as having similar social power." I am grateful for his thought, because it can't be that leaning into appreciation of one identity necessarily has to carry with it the disparagement or persecution of another. And there are countless marvelous masculine identified people throughout the world. So can't we also look at what's not toxic and lift up the good, as well as work to be done with the bad? For that matter, more and more people are acknowledging that gender, like sexuality and so much else, is a spectrum. And so the people who identify as masculine aren't simply men, meaning cisgender men. And I need to just take a moment. Usually when I'm defining terms in a sermon, they are theological or obscure or Greek or Hindu, but today it's like the opposite of all that. Cisgender, I want to be clear about that word, is a very modern term for a person whose gender identity corresponds with the one they were born with. So for example, I am cisgender because what you see is what I've always been and how I've always felt. Does that make sense? Cisgender. So again, the people who identify as masculine aren't simply men, meaning cisgender men or straight men or even simply men in a narrow biological sense at all. In which case, what does non-toxic masculinity mean to them? To all of us, to everyone. Let me admit, it is beyond the capacity of any one sermon to answer that question. But it is possible to add this to the larger conversation, to raise our awareness of what good qualities we can celebrate and teach and strengthen among us when we speak of healthy masculinity. Or, as I am enjoying calling it, salubrious masculinity. Toxic masculinity is such a powerful term, and healthy or positive masculinity just sounds so tepid, trying to stand against its toxic brother. So I decided to embrace the awkwardness, salubrious, which I always thought meant something that paves the way in a good way, something positive, a positive means towards something. But in fact, I have learned in my search for toxicity's antonym, salubrious simply means healthy or healthful. So, salubrious, now you know. That is our goal. The salubrious, the beneficial side of lived masculinity for us to seek and share this Father's Day morning. For this search, I went straight to the source, a small but wide-ranging group of male-identifying people in various ways, in terms of race, age, ethnicity, gender, and sexual identity, all with ties to our church, all of whom, I am humbled to say, were willing to share their sense of lived masculinity with me, what it means to them. And I want to stress, I was not asking them to define masculinity generally or for anyone else. I was asking them to define it as they experience it. I asked them for their thoughts with an upfront footnote that I would want to share as much as possible of what they said in this sermon. But if there was anything they said they realized they didn't want quoted, they could always let me know, and I would take it out. And everyone was willing to speak on the record, and I am so grateful for the trust and honesty they gave me in these exchanges. A number of them followed up on our conversations with texts and emails, fleshing out further their thoughts. These discussions were not just key, but surprising, because though this all began as a quest for the salubrious, it ended up as a quest to define masculinity itself. And often, the more we worked on it and talked about it, the more elusive it became. But also, each person offered a perspective that really contributed to the whole. And together, their takes were almost dizzying as I worked to combine them into this single sermon, formed from such a rich aggregate of thoughts and hopes regarding what masculinity has meant and can mean to them, and by extension, to any of us and all of us. I asked longtime First U member and community leader Len Cabral about his understanding of salubrious masculinity, and he told me what he thought about in response was kindness. And how kindness has nothing to do with weakness, but it has everything to do with being a father, a husband, a friend. He said, growing up, if someone does something being rude or fresh or mean, that's macho or cool. And then kindness gets mistaken for weakness, which is maybe why some men have trouble finding their kind zone, and instead lean into the rough edges and the macho and the don't cry, don't be a softy stuff. Usually it's when someone has, this is all Len, usually it's when someone has a crack in their character that they lean into being mean or a bully. In fact, he said, kindness goes along more with wholeness. As a professional storyteller and regional leader in Providence and in the southern New England Cape Verdean community, Len was part of the 10 Men Project. 10 Men is a program of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence that recruits male community leaders to work within their spheres of influence by educating themselves and others about men's role in ending domestic violence and mobilizing their communities to find ways to prevent gender-based violence. Len remembers some teachers he had in high school who promoted toxic masculinity. They had been in the war, and they came back out of the war and became teachers. And he said some of his peers were lucky to get out of that period alive. But over time, attitudes change. In his case, raising daughters and also being raised by a strong mother made him more aware of sexism and discrimination. He said, men like to fix things, which leads to mansplaining sometimes, but also there are sometimes things that need to be fixed. And sometimes those things are within us men. Len believes that, quote, more men are realizing that we have a stake in the kind of men that follow us, from raising kids, being educators, being role models for the sake of our daughters, our sisters, our mothers. Regarding this, Len thinks especially of his good friend Mike Van Leesten, who ended up raising all 3 of his kids himself. Len and his friends watched Mike as the first single man they knew, raising his 2 sons and a daughter. And this was also a big influence. The company we keep that can teach us if we're willing to pay attention and learn. And also, in terms of daughters, having daughters as opposed to having sons, he wanted to role model the kind of guys they might end up having in their lives. But for Len, it was important also that his girls played sports, could be physical and strong. And also for them, he wanted to be a good man, along with his friends and their extended male family. They were all models for the girls, and also for Len. Again, there's so much in the company we keep. For Len, finding that balance between the yin and the yang, being centered, is part of the wholeness. He said, for men, finding the feminine side as we mature, connecting with the more wholesome, more nurturing, is part of the journey of growing and aging. Maybe this is true for women too, finding the balance of masculinity within themselves, he wondered. As people age, they hopefully become more whole, more balanced between the poles of feminine and masculine. First U member David Anthony is a family medicine doctor, a husband, father, and son. I got to know David when he was serving on the COVID task force, helping to advise our leadership on how to weather the pandemic. And I experience him as very thoughtful, very reliable, very patient, and very caring in all his participation, which is why I asked him to talk with me about this topic. What does masculine mean to him? It was a tough question. David doesn't often think about himself explicitly as a man or as masculine. He told me his natural tendency is to be reluctant about labels and groups. He is someone who has never felt that he exactly fit the classic description of the macho masculine guy. He said, I have never felt that I fit the stereotype of a manly man, but both in some of my interests and activities and in my pet personality, being somewhat more quiet and gentle than my male counterparts growing up. From a young age, he has loved to cook, and lately he also knits a lot. And he does not feel awkward going into a knitting store or sitting in public and knitting. But as he put it, that being said, I have never felt anything but masculine, and I have always identified as a man. One thing David regrets in this era of thinking about gender fluidity is that maybe it leaves less room for someone to be strongly identified as male and masculine. As he spoke about it, David realized he holds a sense of concern that thinking about gender entirely as a spectrum leaves less room for the sensitive male who also still wholly identifies as male. He wrote me a follow-up email about this to clarify his thought, saying, today's world has allowed an expansion of an individual's options about their own gender, and I celebrate that. And still I feel a sense of loss in that I sense a hardening of the male stereotype. In today's world, a sensitive male growing up may be encouraged to wonder if the male stereotype does not mesh with their sense of self, if they are in fact not male but some other gender. And while I encourage that individual to feel free to decide how to express themselves, I feel also that the range of acceptable masculine expression is perhaps being restricted. If I am a gentle and sensitive person, I must not be entirely masculine. He continued, but as you brought me to think about how I identify as masculine, I've come to a few ideas. In my role as a man, I often feel responsible for taking care of those around me. This includes attending to their feelings as well as their overall safety and comfort. I feel this most strongly with my family, but extended to others around me as well. When someone around me needs something, who else but I should rise to assist them? Caring for others relates to another part of my masculine identity, which is steadiness. I feel that the ability to remain calm in the storm is a virtue that I connect somewhat to being a man. Using my phrasing from before, when the stuff hits the fan, who else but I should keep my head about myself and rise to help? Steadiness is sometimes reduced to stoicism when people talk about masculinity, but I don't like that term as it implies a repression of feelings. I can feel things, but value being able to work past feeling in the moment in order to make the situation better. I should caveat these thoughts, he said, by saying that I do not feel these attributes to be exclusively masculine. While I feel these attributes to be part of my masculine identity, I know and love women who manifest them as well. So much of our society is fixated on the difference between men and women, often in ways that I think can be damaging. Women are loving and have motherly instincts, therefore men must not, and vice versa. And one of the points David raised came up with almost everyone I spoke to, that there's an exaggerated Hollywood take on masculinity. I think it's sort of a Rambo, Vin Diesel, Die Hard type that's out there as a paradigm that we all receive and perceive. Strikingly, it is not one that it seems many men in our fold identify with or would even wish to, which is interesting. I talked with Michael Currier, a longtime First U member, and briefly following up just yesterday, I asked how I should identify him for this sermon, and with his unerring sense of humor, he suggested handsome, witty, charming. And I think that works. So, everybody, Michael Currier. Michael thinks that generally men are taught to fix things, offer solutions, be less process-oriented, and more get her done, which then quickly gets so complicated, which is positive masculinity, which is toxic masculinity. What is masculinity? Michael's own understanding is now influenced by Hindu traditions, yogic traditions that suggest these are energies we tap into, regardless of the physical plumbing we each carry. Masculine energies are qualities like assertiveness, stoicism. Interesting, stoicism explicitly comes up again. Problem-solving leadership, less collaborative, more independent. Feminine energies would generally be more yielding, collaborative, intuitive. When he was young, Michael had a paper route, and he still remembers how powerfully one day when delivering someone's newspaper, he got caught up in their beautiful garden. His mother had to actually come fetch him, and he was still all, look at these foxgloves. And flowers still fascinate him. Michael's own home life while he was growing up was tumultuous and full of upheaval. As he put it, I think of my father, who, although he was emotionally constricted, he fulfilled all his social obligations. He was a hard worker. He did his best to provide for his family. Even after the divorce from my mother, he had a limited capacity to be present emotionally. So Michael didn't have a lot of strong male role models growing up and didn't think much about it. He feels he was pretty feminine. One day his mother called him gay for some way he was moving his body, and it made him and his brother very self-conscious about how they behave. But he can remember one positive male role model who really made a difference to him, a neighbor who was kind and non-judgmental, and their house was always open. This neighbor had a steadfastness about him, with no nonsense. In the middle of his kids doing lots of things, he held space for his family. So there was that example of masculinity as the quiet holding of space. Michael said, "It was through the Davises that I learned that family could offer comfort, grounding, glimpses of safety, even from across the street. I couldn't access it then, but I knew it was possible." He began to think more about this, and then eventually grew into some awareness that masculinity could also still be available to him. It is much more recent, a couple of years ago maybe, that he began to lean into this, becoming more assertive, though he is still also collaborative. So he found himself stepping into a more comfortable relationship with his masculinity, having more comfortably inhabited femininity, and now he moves more comfortably between those energies. Upon further reflection, Michael reaffirmed the characteristics he associates with positive masculinity: steadfastness, again, honesty, courage, protectiveness, assertiveness. He says, "I am grateful to the men and women who taught me how to be emotionally and socially courageous, to stand up for what I believe to be true in this world." Jimmy Carter always seemed like a genuinely good human being, steadfast to his ideals. That idea brings me to other world leaders: MLK, the Kennedys, Mandela, folks who are willing to get imprisoned, be scorned in popular opinion, or even die for what they considered to be a just world. He said, "It took me a long time to see myself as comfortable in my own masculinity. I think for a long time it felt like I was responding to other people's expectations of my gender. It wasn't until I let go of my concerns about other people's expectations for me and just started to feel my way through what felt right to me that I felt more actualized in my gender expression, in my comfort with both my masculine and feminine. Maybe healthy masculinity for me is some skillfulness around both masculine and feminine energies." Which brings me to a song Michael mentioned, one I hadn't heard of in such a long time. It's contemporary folk singer Christine Lavin's "Sensitive New Age Guys," which she wrote a long time ago with another great folk singer, John Gorka. And we're going to sing just a small snippet of it. So the refrain is, "Sensitive New Age guys." Can you do that? Sensitive New Age guys. One more time. Sensitive New Age guys. Nice. So it's like a little bit of a call of response. You ready? Who likes to talk about their feelings? Sensitive New Age guys. Who knows that if you kiss a boo-boo, it will start healing? Sensitive New Age guys. Who likes to cry at weddings? Who thinks that football is very upsetting? Whose favorite place to hang out can be a shopping mall? At the movie Castaway, who cried for Wilson the volleyball? And now it's not that, it's an ooh. Ooh, ooh, whose last names are hyphenated. So you get the picture. It's what Michael was talking about, skillfulness around both masculine and feminine energies. I spoke also with Reverend D.L. Helfer, who is a local UU minister and colleague and occasional attendee here at First U, who I've known since I first came here to serve you 6 years ago. D.L. stressed that they wouldn't presume to speak on behalf of others, only could offer their own personal reflection. And D.L. felt that it's not so much about masculinity as about having masculinity attributed, masculinity as a privilege or an appearance. If DL is perceived as male, they are treated differently and typically better. Privileged in a way they're not if they're perceived as non-binary or trans. So masculinity is partly an externalized experience. A cisgender male is less likely to be confronted by the question, what kind of man do you want to be? It's not as much about what kind of male they want to be or how they want to use their male power in the world, whereas a gender diverse person seeking masculinity is making an active decision about who and how they want to be. In which case, what is masculinity? It's presented as a binary when in reality what it really represents, strength and resilience, this is DL's reflection, strength and resilience and so forth, are good traits that lots of people across gender have, but that gets attributed to male beings. DL partly ended up wanting to say masculinity is a construct, but the other part of DL wanted to lift up that even DL's friends in transition are seeking an appearance and a set of qualities that has some cohesiveness to it. But some of these qualities are very present in women, from butch lesbians to all other women. So DL does think masculinity exists as a thing, but it is a thing that exists across a spectrum that is mistakenly attributed to just men, but that can be in all people. Which brings me to my conversation with Kai Robert Speaker, our worship associate today. Kai, who has grown up in this church. And Kai wanted me to start by acknowledging his privilege as a cis man who centers his masculinity and masculine ideas around idealism, even as he realizes that simply centering humanity is not always effective in a patriarchal system. Yeah, so you got to put your seatbelt on for this one. In our conversation, Kai offered a further refinement on this topic that was unfolding in all these conversations with different folks, which was that when thinking of this whole idea of masculinity versus femininity as a spectrum, a continuum, maybe it's really less about trying to identify masculinity per se, and more about looking at a fundamental characteristic or quality in particular, for instance, resilience, and how resilience, plays out along the masculine-feminine spectrum. Kai's redefinition of the premise makes me wonder whether this is also partly about generational differences and evolutions in understanding. Kai thinks that we are all in a time of such flux that it's hard for all of us in every generation to really grasp and operate within shared understandings. But he feels that even within conventional masculinity, which is built upon the misleading, outdated binary understanding, there is plenty of healthy masculinity. For him, pensiveness is a component of salubrious masculinity, as opposed to aggression or emotionality. So for instance, the example of the wise older man you would go see at university, that archetype of strength and deep thinking feels like a positive example. And part of what makes good masculinity good is the opposition of it to toxic masculinity. If you can be a man who thinks powerfully and waits and uses reason and emotion to think, there is much power in that, he says. For Kai, the only thing that makes him masculine is that he is a guy. His notion of himself is masculine. He feels masculine in part because biologically he's comfortable in his body. For him, healthy masculinity is playful, joyful, full of teasing and camaraderie. Masculinity does include strength, not physical but characterological, persistence, stoicism. There it is again. But not, Kai said, in his opinion, But note, Kai said that in his opinion, mothers are the ultimate Stoics. Cynthia Roberts. And yet there is this underlying stoicism in masculinity too. Also, there is a collective spirit to do what is for the good of all, and there is sadness, the poignancy in the struggle all human beings face trying to understand why we exist, and sadness in experiencing life. For Kai, his masculinity is part of his human experience, and it is hard to break them apart. Kai's mother, Cynthia Roberts, helps to organize the 10 Men program, and Kai's familiarity with those ideals and environment makes him very aware that there are many men who take their living seriously and work to be better men, the best men they can, overcoming the kind of social constructs that oppress others and even themselves. In the end, for Kai, if something is a spectrum, you can't not reside on the spectrum, even if you are all the way on the other end of it. In that way, he said, we all have a place within masculinity and within femininity, and it's everyone's prerogative to identify however they want in their search for meaning. So there you have it. It's a lot, I know. So many layers to healthy, positive, salubrious masculinity. The importance of kindness and balance for wholeness and selfhood. The place of sensitivity and caring for others as forms of strength in masculinity. Moving between the energies of masculinity and femininity as a path available to all of us. Masculinity as not only internalized, but also externalized by and for all people. Masculinity as one location, not the only location, for human qualities like resilience, playfulness, and again, stoicism, steadfastness. May we find all the ways we can to recognize and honor the salubrious, even as we work to crowd out the toxic within us, among us, in all our ways, and in all the wholeness of our living. Thank you, men, male-identified people, all the masculine and all the feminine here in this community and in each of our souls, for all that you give and all that you do and all that you are. Amen. Our second hymn is We Are. It's in your teal helmet, number 1051. And what we're going to do is we're going to just sing the refrain together. Then we're going to hear the intro that Vicky's going to play, and then we're going to move through the song. I will sing as strongly as I'm able, and I ask you to do so also. The more familiar you get with the song, the more I expect you to be joining in. Can we all rise in body and spirit? And I'm going to sing through the refrain first and ask you to then sing it together with me once, okay? Has everybody got the hymn? So we're going to need a key. Thank you. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, the morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Again, for each child that's born, the morning star rises and sings to the universe who opportunity to practice generosity, to remind ourselves of the ways that we can give to this church and sustain this beloved community in all its work, in its present and its future. Thank you again so much in advance for all that you give and all that you do and all that you are. The invitations I have for you this morning for the following up on our faith are just a reminder that for the summer, our fellowship after worship is outside in the breezeway between this meeting house and the parish house. Light snacks and drinks are served there, and we do have a special treat today. There is some ice cream left over from last week's picnic. So if you want ice cream, head into the parish house kitchen for bowls or popsicles before coming back out to socialize. And also make sure you are reading the first few times. We're hearing from people who are saying, oh, I didn't know such and such was happening. It is always in the newsletter. It's worth your time, just the 5 or 10 minutes, to make sure you read it when it comes out, the regular edition on Friday, and very special editions sometimes on Tuesday. Where'd it go? There it is. Our benediction, flipping the order, is an excerpt from a poem called Father. It's by Ted Kooser, who is a former United States Poet Laureate and also an active Unitarian Universalist. You had good legs, Dad, and a good storekeeper's eye. Asked once if you remembered a teacher of mine, you said, I certainly do. Size 10, a little something in blue. How you loved what you'd done with your life. Now you're gone, and the clerks are lazy, the glass cases smudged, the sale sweaters pulled off onto the floor. But what good times we had before it was over. After the stores had closed, you posing as customers, strutting in big flowered hats, those aisles like a stage, the pale mannequins watching. We laughed until we cried.
Now, please join me in the chalice extinguishing printed in your order of service. We carry the flame of peace and love and hope until we meet again.
And can we all join in closing song, May Love Be Your Guide. The blue card is in your pew. Shall we rise?